Have you ever wondered what exactly happens to human consciousness when the brain shuts down from oxygen deprivation, and how a newly executed soul could subdue cosmic entities that have terrorized humanity since the dawn of time? Two hidden forces collided violently on that day of deep darkness, but the details of this spiritual invasion reveal a military plan drafted centuries before the very foundation of Jerusalem. What was locked in the depths of the abyss was not merely the echo of forgotten souls, but the captivity of entire generations awaiting an impossible rescue. And the answer to this mystery is encoded in the oldest records of archaeology and ancient Middle Eastern theology. When you analyze the detailed medical records of the first-century Roman crucifixion, you immediately understand that the death on that Friday afternoon was not a simple poetic faint or a peaceful, serene cardiac arrest. You realize the extreme biological cost of a human body that endured the devastating impact of the Roman flagrum, a brutal whip of braided leather with sharpened bone and lead spheres that tore away entire chunks of skin and muscle with every strike, creating an anatomical carnage. The man on the rough wooden stake had suffered severe hypovolemic shock, losing critical blood volume even before the 18-centimeter-long, 1-centimeter-thick rusted iron nails pierced his wrists and ankles. These nails struck the human median nerve relentlessly, causing jolts of paralyzing pain that traveled through the arms, a sensation described by modern experts as equivalent to touching exposed high-voltage electrical wires. The lungs slowly collapsed under the inert weight of the hanging body, forcing the diaphragm into an exhausting and continuous spasm, a biomechanical battle where the victim had to push up on nailed feet just to pull in a shallow breath of oxygen. Total darkness. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, asphyxiation from muscle exhaustion reached its biological apex. The cardiac muscle ruptured under extreme anatomical stress, accumulating lethal fluid in the pericardium. The brain shut down completely. Respiration ceased. The 33-year-old biological body, cooling rapidly in the arid and unforgiving atmosphere of Jerusalem, was rudely removed from the blood-stained wood and locked in a newly excavated limestone cave located in a nearby garden. To ensure the security of the political corpse, the Romans rolled a massive rock over the entrance. This sealing stone weighed approximately 2 tons, a weight equivalent to 3 African elephant calves, or the combined weight of 2 compact cars stacked, requiring the brute force of several strong men using wooden levers to move it mere inches. First-century burial engineering was designed to be inviolable, a true fortress of stone and clay intended to keep the dead in their place and the living out. But the documentary narrative did not end with the dried blood pooled on the cold stone of Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. The deep theology of the ancient Middle East reveals that while the victim's physical body suffered the inflexible stiffness of rigor mortis beneath linen wrappings, the spiritual essence of Christ was initiating the most violent and revolutionary journey in the entire spiritual history of the cosmos. You must urgently forget the folkloric medieval image of hell filled with red flames, boiling cauldrons, and cartoonish demons carrying pitchforks. The conceptual reality of the first century, rigorously documented in the ancient Hebrew scriptures, treated the entire underworld as the vast and silent Sheol, or Hades in the traditional Greek language. It was the immense mass grave of all souls, an invisible and inescapable reservoir that ruthlessly swallowed 100% of the human race without any distinction of morality, wealth, or political power. Crowned kings, starving beggars, visionary prophets, and brutal killers descended inexorably into the same dimension of grey shadows and lethargic oblivion. It was a cosmic maximum security prison where the massive doors locked only from the outside. No escape was possible. The ancient Babylonians, centuries before Rome existed, called this terrible place the Land of No Return, a dusty and gloomy abyss where legends claimed that withered souls drank muddy water and ate bitter dust, surrounded by 7 concentric walls that were totally impassable. A dark concept that terrorized the collective human psyche for over 4,000 years of recorded civilization. This was the final destination feared by every inhabitant of the ancient world, a plane of diminished existence where human vitality was sucked away like light disappearing at the bottom of a black hole, an oppressive environment as dark as the floor of an abyssal ocean trench where no ray of sunlight had ever penetrated since the creation of the earth. The structure of the Jewish underworld was not, however, a simple, homogeneous space, but rather a vast, divided geographic abyss, as described in the documentary narrative of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. There, you find the clinical description of 2 main chambers separated by an impassable abyss, a spiritual geological rift as wide as the Grand Canyon and as incredibly deep as the Mariana Trench, preventing any transit between the zones. On one side of this cosmic gorge lay the feared place of absolute torment, an arid dimension where souls consumed by their own moral corruption and rebellion burned in a maddening existential thirst, crying out for a single drop of water to relieve the continuous agony. On the other side of the impossible rift was the bosom of Abraham, a compartment of temporary comfort and peaceful rest, where the faithful righteous of the Old Testament waited anxiously for the promised divine redemption, trapped in a strange state of spiritual suspended animation, conscious of their peace, but unable to ascend to the full presence of the Supreme Creator. The system failed, or rather you must understand that the ancient sacrificial system was purposefully provisional and pedagogically incomplete. For an incredible 1,500 years since the dramatic delivery of the moral and ceremonial law on the smoking summit of Mount Sinai, the vital blood of millions of innocent sheep, vigorous bulls, and unblemished goats was poured out non-stop on the immense bronze altars of Israel. It was an industrial volume of biological sacrifice capable of completely filling 3 modern Olympic swimming pools with animal blood, creating red rivers that ran through the temple complex in Jerusalem during every major festival. But all this monumental ceremonial effort served only as a theological palliative, a temporary and fragile covering that lacked the currency required to cancel the gigantic cosmic debt of chronic human sin. The blood of lambs covered but did not erase the transgression. Death, therefore, maintained its absolute monopoly over the human race, locking kings and priests in the darkness of the underworld while the clock of the centuries ticked on relentlessly. The Messiah's descent into the underworld on Friday night was a true act of unprecedented military invasion in the architecture of the universe. The Apostle Peter describes this cataclysmic event with surgical literary precision in his first apostolic letter, chapter 3, verses 18 to 20. The canonical text states categorically that Christ, killed violently in the fragile flesh, but quickened with absolute power in the eternal Spirit, descended and preached to the spirits held in rigorous prison. You must note that the specific Greek word used by the author for the act of preaching does not mean offering a late second chance at salvation or a compassionate invitation to repentance, but rather the technical term kerusso, which means to proclaim aloud like an unquestionable imperial herald, announcing a definitive military victory over a totally conquered enemy territory. The sonic and spiritual impact of this sudden arrival was as loud as a meteor striking the Earth's crust, or comparable to the thunderous detonation of a nuclear warhead at the silent bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Pure divine light violently invaded the absolute darkness that had reigned untouched for 5 cruel millennia of troubled human history. He descended to the lowest and most remote parts of the earth as textually recorded in the Apostle Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 9. The somber dimension of the dead, which had operated freely under the strict jurisdiction of psychological terror since the cowardly murder of Abel in the dawn of humanity, was suddenly exposed and stripped bare to the overwhelming presence of the one who held the very inexhaustible essence of unbreakable life. The ancestral terror, which kept billions of minds paralyzed under the threat of the grave, collapsed instantly, revealing itself to be as fragile as a house of cards tumbling in a Category 5 hurricane. The black stone foundations of the underworld trembled. But the Messiah's thunderous proclamation was not directed only toward the innumerable human souls inhabiting the dusty corridors of Hades. The dense text of 1 Peter also directly connects this triumphant descent to the dark spirits who were disobedient in the distant days of the patriarch Noah. This leads us inevitably back to the obscure and frequently misunderstood events documented in Genesis chapter 6, verse 2 onwards, as well as the deep Jewish theological elaboration found preserved in essential apocalyptic texts of the Second Temple period, especially the famous Book of Enoch in its structural chapter 10. The ancient narrative consistently points to celestial entities, fallen angels, who illegally crossed the dimensional borders established by the Creator to systematically corrupt the original human genetics and establish terrible global empires of bloody brutality and unbridled cannibalism in remote antiquity. These invading beings actively taught primitive men the destructive art of mass warfare, advanced metallurgy for forging sharp swords, deceptive sorcery, and the production of seductive cosmetics, generating a civilian mortality rate and an explosion of urban violence so extreme that it forced the execution of a purgative global flood as an inevitable divine response. As a severe and exemplary punishment, these formidable rebel cosmic beings had been chained with unbreakable spiritual bonds in the densest darkness possible, imprisoned in Tartarus. This place was the maximum security wing of the underworld itself, functioning as a dungeon of crushing pressure located in the lowest and most suffocating depths of cosmic existence, where they awaited the day of the final inexorable judgment. A dark fact confirmed categorically in the second letter of Peter, chapter 2, verse 4, and in the Epistle of Jude, verse 6. The paradox presented here is shocking in its existential magnitude. The supreme creator of all galaxies descended personally to the dirtiest, most hostile, and forgotten basement of his own stained creation to confront face-to-face the arrogant evil entities that had attempted in the past to completely destroy the sacred human lineage. He did not descend to negotiate peace treaties, but to announce unequivocally the absolute and humiliating failure of their millennial rebellion, rubbing the defeat into their once proud faces. Absolute silence. The entities imprisoned in Tartarus could not utter a single syllable in response. The incarnate divine authority stepped firmly onto the central territory of universal despair and took possession of the master keys of death and hell, declaring with a roar of authority the irrevocable end of that specific cosmic captivity. The spiritual darkness, once unshakable, was torn in half, spreading panic among the fallen hosts who now perfectly understood their sealed fate and the impossible victory of the crucified man. While the indomitable soul of the Messiah dismantled the millennial power structures of Hades, the human society paralyzed in Jerusalem remained in the most absolute ignorance, crushed under the weight of apparent defeat. The human psychological cost for the followers of Jesus in those terrible 48 hours following the brutal crucifixion was devastating on every imaginable level. You need to understand that the acute psychology of total abandonment relentlessly corroded the sanity of 11 adult men hiding cowardly in a cramped and dimly lit room in the upper chamber. The visceral panic of being hunted like animals by the ruthless Jewish temple guard, the paralyzing terror provoked by the sudden sound of every footstep on the night streets of cobblestone, which sounded to their ears like the tragic harbinger of a Roman military raid, elevated hormonal cortisol levels to peaks of lethal and unbearable post-traumatic stress. They trembled at every shadow that moved in the window cracks. Constant fear. The vibrant messianic hope of Israel had been publicly executed as a vulgar traitor to the Roman Empire and hung on a rustic piece of wood to rot in plain sight under the shocked eyes of an immense crowd of nearly 100,000 devout pilgrims visiting the seething Jewish capital during the annual Passover festival. The disciples firmly believed that relentless death had won the final great battle, silently swallowing the promising young carpenter from the Galilee region in the same cruel way it had done with all the other deluded false prophets and rebel messiahs of the last 5 bloody decades, whose anonymous corpses were discarded and thrown into the foul-smelling valley of Hinnom to be mercilessly devoured by hungry wild dogs and the constant flames of trash. Physical death seemed the irrefutable destination and the final impassable wall against which all divine promises had violently shattered into 1,000 pieces, melting like wax in a blast furnace under the heat of brutal Roman reality. However, simultaneously in the invisible world, the thunderous emptying of the bosom of Abraham was occurring, a strategic rescue maneuver that shook the very foundations of the spiritual world. Classical Christian theology calls this grand, unparalleled event the immense harrowing of hell. The triumphant Messiah entered with royal authority into the peaceful compartment of the sleeping righteous and freed the faithful captives from their temporary bonds. Bold prophets like the fearless Isaiah, whom Hebrew tradition claims was brutally sawn in half by order of King Manasseh, warrior heroes like King David, founding patriarchs of the faith like Abraham, the suffering Isaac, and the transformed Jacob, all those who had died holding firmly to the hope of a future redemption based on a promising divine credit of justice, which was only billed and paid with blood on that specific Bloody Friday. The rescue was effected. The erudite Apostle Paul wrote masterfully in his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 8, citing ancient prophecies, that when he finally ascended with power to the celestial heights, he led captivity captive. The descriptive image used in the Greek culture of the time is exactly identical to that of a powerful, victorious Roman general returning triumphantly to the majestic capital of the empire, walking along the famous Appian Way, publicly dragging his proud, defeated enemies, tied in heavy iron chains, while proudly displaying the immense spoils rescued in battle to the vast crowd of delirious, ecstatic citizens, like a Roman general on the Appian Way displaying conquered gold. The historical comparison is surgically precise for the spiritual event. He not only defeated the entity of death on its own territory, but ruthlessly despoiled all its trophies accumulated by centuries of tyranny. The abyss lost. The dark and unbreakable vault of Hades, which kept billions of souls under rigorous invisible custody, had its heavy spiritual hinges violently ripped off and destroyed by the expansive force of an indestructible life, like a colossal dam bursting disastrously under the impossible weight of billions of liters of water, flooding the valley of death with the light of eternity in a formidable spiritual roar, similar to the clash of 2 continental tectonic plates. This entire colossal cosmic rescue operation lasted exactly 3 days, the exact and fundamental mathematical period established by the wisdom of ancestral Jewish tradition to irrefutably confirm the biological irreversibility of a human being's physical death. In the predominant complex rabbinic thought of that first-century era, documented in Talmudic commentaries, it was superstitiously believed that the immaterial soul of the individual wandered sorrowfully around its inert body for exactly 72 hours in search of an opportunity for a miraculous return, but that unquestionably on the fourth consecutive day, when the human face disfigured tragically from aggressive cellular putrefaction and lethal hydrogen sulfide, gas began to horribly swell the internal organs of the corpse, exhaling an unbearable odor of rotting flesh. The soul would abandon the body, desolate forever, accepting defeat. Bodies rotting, bodies. It was precisely and micrometrically within this critical biological and theological window, at the exact moment when complete rigor mortis had already relentlessly hardened every muscle fiber of the cold corpse, frozen on the slab in the damp stone tomb, that the final and most shocking event of human history occurred with uncontrollable fury. The spirit of the Creator returned to the macerated body. The internal cellular temperature of that dead shell rose dramatically in imperceptible fractions of a second. The billions of once dead and necrosed cells abruptly reversed the relentless flow of thermodynamic entropy in an incomprehensible process that aggressively defies all the solid laws of quantum physics and advanced biology known in the last 100 years of rigorous modern scientific research. The process was scientifically impossible, but empirically real. Definitive victory. The heart, cowardly pierced by a sharp Roman iron spear that had drained clear water and dark, coagulated blood, quickly emptying an astonishing volume of nearly 800 milliliters of precious, intimately mixed pericardial and pleural fluids, suddenly, inexplicably and miraculously, hermetically sealed its biological tissues, which had been brutally torn by the enemy blades. Thick blood began to circulate again with astonishing hydraulic force through the previously collapsed vascular system, immediately restoring a perfect blood pressure of exactly 120/80 millimeters of mercury in the arteries of the man who had been in chronic demise. The punctured and withered lungs, which had collapsed painfully several hours earlier due to the accumulation of fatal asphyxiating fluid caused by the torture on the wood, expanded with the force of a mechanical bellows, greedily sucking in the fresh, icy air of the cold Sunday dawn, healthily and immediately inflating the countless withered pulmonary alveoli that until that exact second had seemed fragile and dead, like a dry sponge absorbing water after months of scorching desert. Organic mortality, once invincible, was brutally swallowed by the very structure of indomitable life. Outside the sepulchral cave, the heavy and impassable stone that sealed access to the cold limestone tomb was meticulously sealed with thick, sun-hardened clay, and arrogantly bore the feared imperial stamp in Roman wax. This governmental contraption relied on a thin string, carefully stretched from end to end on the rock, a rudimentary but relentless official security device that guaranteed, under the iron law of Caesar, the terrible penalty of immediate death to any citizen or slave of the vast Roman Empire, who in an act of extreme madness or suicidal rebellion dared to break it without the express authorization of Governor Pilate. However, faced with the formidable force unleashed inside the tomb, that heavy, formidable barrier, comparable to the colossal obstacle of an immense wall of an impassable fortress of silence, was cast away with extreme violence and ease, as if it were an harmless and light cork being hurled through the air, pushed impetuously by the gigantic and overwhelming pressure of a violent geyser in full volcanic eruption, echoing through the entire garden like the deafening sound of rusted iron gears, breaking irremediably under intense and sudden unbearable industrial pressure. Time up. Simultaneously with the clamor of the colossal stone being violently ripped from its imposing protective groove in the rock, the exact 16 war veteran heavy infantry soldiers who composed the elite Praetorian Guard assigned to the site, men of steel brutally trained since their youth to maim and kill with calculated coldness by means of extremely precise blows to the enemy's neck, using the fearsome half-meter-long gladius forged of lethal Roman carbon steel. and heavy shield in the unbeatable tortoise formation collapsed in immediate and humiliating instant on the merciless rocky limestone floor. Their imposing bodies fell abruptly into an indescribable state of immediate catatonic paralysis, totally induced by an uncontrollable and overwhelming absolute panic, while their sensitive and exhausted central nervous systems were instantly overloaded to the extreme biological limit of human madness, burning synapses in a generalized and paralyzing way, all because of a sudden and brutal unfiltered exposure to an intense, glorious divine light that shone blindly in that narrow garden with the blinding magnitude and terrifying scorching power of an astonishing 100 suns, exploding cruelly exactly at the intense desert noon. A massive energy irradiation that was as incredibly bright as the cosmic explosion of a massive supernova, fiercely illuminating the confines of the dark and lonely galaxy in just an imperceptible fraction of a second, sweeping away fear and imposing awe irresistibly upon the armed and violent man who had dared to try to imprison the very creative force in a damp hole on the slope of the dead rock of Jerusalem on that unforgettable icy night of the triumphant resurrection of the history of humanity, fallen under the weight of its countless centuries of spiritual failure without repair or plausible natural redemption. Human dominion broke. Impossible advance. What, after all, emerged haughty from that somber, violated and open tomb on that cold Sunday spring dawn in the east was not by any means a sad, artificially reanimated corpse in the best macabre style, stumbling clumsily in long, dirty linen strips stained with putrid sweat blood and encrusted with heavy, rich perfume spices of imported aloe vera and expensive resinous myrrh of preservation, the total absurd weight of which amounted to nearly 34 massive kilograms of costly, sticky embalming material used in the funeral era by the wealthy aristocrats and notable Pharisees of influence of the local Sanhedrin Council. What emerged from there, walking freely and decisively through the dew-covered garden, was, in fact and incontestably, the dazzling and perfect prototype of a completely new and recreated humanity, endowed with a formidable, perfectly tangible and structured physical body, but incredibly imbued with extraordinary, advanced extra-dimensional properties unknown to the common material world. Impossible properties that made him freely capable of passing with absolute ease through locked doors and thick solid walls of hewn stone in Jerusalem, appearing mysteriously in the closed upper room without breaking forged iron locks, and yet maintaining the incredible capacity to have a natural hunger to eat calmly hearty pieces of fresh grilled fish on the fire lit on the stony shores of the calm Sea of Galilee, a few long, mysterious days after this colossal historical and biological event that permanently fractured the recorded history of the great and proud Roman Empire built by ambitious kings and powerful bloodthirsty generals of the lost ancient world. The dark and silent tomb of the flowering garden was no longer the unquestionable end of the line for the anatomical fragility of the weak and sick human species of past centuries that invariably perished as victims of serious mortal diseases without any possibility of final salvation. The game of the visible and invisible universe had, incontestably and dramatically, changed its own rules of perpetual imprisonment after that silent, cold and moonlit Friday descent. Existential void overcome. End of the line. The final, incontestable truth about this vast, ignored historical episode is that what Jesus Christ voluntarily executed in the invisible underworld realm in the world of the dead was not a naive formal diplomatic visit to seal old friendly agreements with spiritual entities imprisoned by celestial revolt and demons, but a violent, focused military rescue invasion that lethally fractured the heavy, robust, unshakable pillars of the ancient eternal condemnation that suffocated and paralyzed, mercilessly and blindly, the billions of human beings chained for countless eras. The dense cosmic darkness of overwhelming collective death simply could not, in any possible way, hold him chained. Not because the powerful giant black doors of thick iron that formed the invincible wall of the dark and lugubrious Hades were built poorly and considered frivolous and weak for war, but because the mysterious, resplendent divine intruder who penetrated the somber heart of the wide-eyed darkness carried in his wounded but intensely revived chest the unbearable and colossal weight of an overwhelming and indestructible spiritual purity that quickly consumed all the sad, thick, invisible iron chains of the long and tortuous historical human captivity, relentlessly swallowing and melting the shackles with ease, like the devouring fire of an industrial blast furnace, greedily melting in an instant, a fragile spiderweb woven of abandoned cotton candy, spreading like a lethal virus in a metropolis vulnerable and unprotected by centuries of constant degradation and deep theological rot, irrecoverable by the moral rules of weak obedience attempted by humanity on the arid Sinaitic Peninsula, abandoned by history. What they tragically did not know, they were tying in heavy linen strips, preparing with perfumes, and sadly burying in a cold hole, dug into the steep slope of a jagged rocky hill on the violent and blood-stained afternoon of the somber Jewish Friday, of the most tumultuous week of that fateful decade, was precisely and incredibly the exact, microscopic, invincible, and perfectly programmed divine seed that would grow in an explosive and formidable way to finally and brutally implode irremediably from the inside out, the proud capital of the final fortified and impregnable fortress of the vast invincible empire of blind human despair, accumulated since the sands of the immemorial deserts of pharaonic ancient Egypt, violently and powerfully opening an unshakable, immense corridor paved with intense divine and salvific spiritual light, pointing straight and without curves to the distant and twinkling stars of countless created galaxies, scattered over the brilliant and infinite cosmic fabric, offering liberation, forgiving the guilt of the deaths of the cruel Calvary, to embrace everyone without limit or restricted exception, shattering and undoing the absolute millennial monopoly, brutally maintained intact by the cowardly, somber, implacable executioner of the pale valley of forgotten human laments, returning every complete and unshakable dignity that had been initially violently corrupted, cowardly lost, snatched treacherously under the dark nocturnal mantle by the deception of death in the dust in the once silent and now redeemed tomb, on a splendid and miraculous morning that the serious Praetorian soldiers of the once glorious Iron Empire would never possess even the sophisticated human vocabulary, blind courage, nor the slightest residual cognitive capacity in the limited mortal brain to rationally explain to the astonished minds of the shocked authorities of the proud and disjointed, weakened Sanhedrin the astonishing and magnificent incalculable extension of the endless amplitude of this formidable and immeasurable, eternal, immortal, unparalleled legacy, generated gloriously in the most complete darkness of the black hole of the worst abyss ever conceived, is the absolute, incontestable, and deeply relieving fact in the aching human chest that the imposing and once feared, unbreakable, cold sepulchre of packed earth or thick, dark, cut rock, where bodies rot relentlessly into dust, no longer represents under any logical hypothesis and will never again be a meddlesome, static, blind and suffocating, somber, impassable wall of cold and rude concrete, without conceivable safe exits in the known universe of suffering, without respite, but has been transformed incredibly by the event of the deadly Roman cross into the only providential illuminated slit, revealing itself grandiosely in the final irrefutable truth, only as a simple, wide-open, gigantic and majestic divine door, totally radiant, destroyed to never again close, with locks of eternal despair at the abyssal gates of the physical universe. The historical biological resurrection, the tomb physically violated and spiritually invaded, is not, nor has it ever been, in any circumstance or era, forgotten by mortal man without strength and fallen in final, inevitable agony. A pale or vague and doubtful and obscure ancient poetic myth and invented molded of falsehoods, written skillfully to naively soothe, to console the sorrows of weak people without a glorious future, or without a divine chance of full forgiveness for their terrible past errors, hidden without sacred blood, shed without value or merit of their own, in the terrible and uncertain temporal crossing that suffocates minds until total destruction in the bottomless and nameless and sunless valley of the mass graves of sick humanity. But it is in fact and truly the unavoidable and supreme cosmic final destination, wonderfully inevitable, guaranteed and written forever in light and inextinguishable fire, and sealed gloriously in an indelible way in every atom reconstructed for every forgiven, redeemed, healed, and resurrected soul of those exhausted ones who, in the modern and ancient deafening chaos, continue firmly, blindly, and with deep, unparalleled boldness to hear the sweet and grave, strong, immortal, absolute words, and follow without ever retreating or having fearful doubts in the pacified, healed mind the imposing, magnanimous and undefeated courageous general, resplendent and invincible, of the immaculate heavens, who personally has already mapped micrometrically from within, with his own dirty sweat, salted water, and thick royal blood in an incontestable way, and carved eternally the entire dark, narrow, mysterious, fearful, and dangerous, long, tortuous, eternal bright path of life without limits in the plenitude of the unsurpassable and perfect return from the somber mortal darkness.